I'm Martin Barrios, and I'm with Sparrow News. Today we're speaking to Mr. Sam Kasman. He's the General Counsel of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is a nonprofit public policy organization based in Washington, D.C. that promotes free enterprise and limited government. And we're following up on a story about subpoenas. The latest is from the Virgin Islands, which has been submitted in a case against the exxon-mobile corporation that involves issues of global warming, but also free enterprise and free speech. Mr. Kasman, could you give us a little bit of a background of what the case is about and what's at stake here?
I should clarify that CEI itself, which is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., did receive a subpoena as well. Right now, to our knowledge, the Virgin Islands AG put out 3 subpoenas, one on Exxon, one to Exxon, one to a public relations firm for Exxon, and the one to us here in D.C.
Wow.
Those were close to my exact words when we received the subpoena.
Wow. So how is free to begin with? Before we get to the other subject of global issue of anthropogenic global warming, how is it that free speech is involved? I have to admit I'm not an attorney, but free speech is something that's very near and dear to me.
Yeah, well, look, I think the only reason that we were hit with the subpoena, and I think the major reason why Exxon got a subpoena that is as overbroad and burdensome as it is, because Exxon's subpoena is seeking documents going back to 1977. Our subpoena is seeking documents involving all our climate and energy work for a full decade beginning in 1997. The only reason we've received those subpoenas is not because of any so-called investigation of possible fraud. It is just to start shutting down the debate over global warming. And that is most intimately a question of free speech. That is, there is a huge debate going on in this country. I think the alarmists who push global warming as a reason to turn society on its head believe that they're losing the real scientific debate, and the tactic they've come up with here, and that this coalition of attorneys generals is carrying out, is to simply shut down the debate on the grounds of fraud, and that is pure and transparent nonsense.
But I notice that there's a partisan component too. I understand that the Attorney General of California, Harris, is also running for Senate in California, so there is that component as well, right?
Well, in terms of politics, I don't know to what extent these various AGs, and really there are, I think, about 17 state AGs involved in this coalition. I don't know to what extent they're so much motivated by anything having to do with their political goals. It may well be a part of it, but they've basically decided that it's their supposed duty as public officials to smash the First Amendment and simply go on to kill the debate in this country.
Well, what's at stake for Mobile? Exxon-Mobile.
I'm sorry. What was that question again?
Well, what's at stake for the Exxon-Mobil and the suit that the attorneys general have against the company?
Okay, Exxon-Mobil has been quite active in the global warming debate. I think they've basically taken, or at least recently taken, a sort of semi-moderate position. They, for example, do favor a carbon tax, or at least they don't oppose it. But what's at stake for them is, one, that all their communications on this issue over the last few decades are going to be tarred as having been part of some so-called campaign to deceive the public. That may well open them up to shareholder lawsuits because And because the statutes being invoked, which are along the lines of racketeering statutes, carry criminal penalties, a lot worse may be in store for them as well. But I think the main issue for all of us from an economic standpoint is that petroleum products ranging from gasoline to anything else made out of petroleum suddenly becomes a sin product, and using it means that you're in collusion to destroy the earth, and that in turn opens the way for sin taxes, which means huge gasoline tax increases, and a general push towards a whole new regime based on fossil fuels and petroleum being some evil.
So you're confusing me. A sin tax on energy? That's kind of a stretch. Where have you seen this before?
I don't think it's a stretch at all.
Wow.
The global warming alarmists want to paint fossil fuels as being an evil product, a product whose use is bad for the planet and for people.
Like tobacco?
I would say worse than tobacco. And in our view, affordable, reliable energy is in no way a sin. It's a blessing of God. And the notion that you're going to try and tax and restrict the use of this good, all in the name of some totally unproven risk to the planet, I think is garbage.
What is the science that they're purporting to prove their case?
There are a number of scientific papers that have come out over the years, many of them based on computer models that allegedly show that continued buildup of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to produce a much less hospitable planet, ranging from droughts to higher temperatures to glaciers melting and increases in sea level and the stronger storms and hurricanes. I think there's a far more persuasive body of evidence indicating that simply is false. For example, over the last 20 years, the planet has basically experienced a plateau as far as global temperatures go, even though the alarmists' models of temperatures indicated that temperatures would continue to increase year after year because carbon dioxide increases year after year. On the question of more severe storms and hurricanes, I think several weeks ago, Warren Buffett, who has billions really at stake in his reinsurance businesses, stated that in terms of his company's experience over the last 15 years, there's been no increase in either the cost or severity of extreme weather events. So look, at a minimum, you've got a wide open debate on this issue. And what these folks have taken, the approach these folks have taken, and that's both the alarmists and the 17 attorneys generals, is that not only is the science settled, but the debate is over, and that's by decree of the law.
Where have you seen this supposition of global warming and the projected effects being sort of, I guess, built into regulation or law elsewhere?
Yeah, I think there have been a slew of incredibly expensive regulations coming out of EPA that attempt to restrict the carbon dioxide emissions that are all based on the notion that carbon dioxide is some sort of global pollutant. It's based totally on that. And you have other federal agencies trying to go after companies because they supposedly did not inform their shareholders or the public of the use of their products has some climate risk when they put out their proxy statements. You really see the global warming alarmism being put into effect in regulations being issued from localities to states to the federal government.
I can recall a time when, say, 20 years ago, the discussion was over the ozone hole. It's that issue seemed to have blown over. Do you think it could just blow over here, or is it rather more advanced as to how this agenda has moved along in government.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to blow over that way. First of all, the ozone issue itself was resolved in large part by some international protocols. And there, I think the evidence was quite a bit solid as to the problem, though once again, I don't think it was that persuasive. Here, you have these proposals for international regulations at the level of the United Nations, for example, aiming at restricting each country's carbon dioxide emissions. And look, frankly, the only surefire way of reducing a country's carbon dioxide emissions is through an economic recession or an economic depression. Energy, affordable, reliable energy, is something that goes hand in hand with economic flourishing, and I think that's what these folks want to stop.
I have to ask, with the Latin term cui bono, who benefits from seeing this agenda advance aside from government overreach? Are there economic actors who
benefit an awful lot? For starters, politicians see this as a great new source of political power because it gives them a supposed justification for restricting individual activities in a way that they never had before. There, for example, has been widespread opposition in this country to increases in the gasoline tax. If people can be persuaded that they need to reduce their use of gasoline in order to save the earth and for their future generations, that opposition might well diminish. There are certainly huge numbers of crony businessmen that see windfalls to be made here in terms of the available tax credits, tax subsidies, and so forth. And if you look at the amount of taxpayer money that's been lost as one solar or renewable energy company after another goes bankrupt, ranging from Solyndra to Sun Energy, those amounts are staggering. I think there are huge numbers of government scientists, government-funded scientists, who realize that unless they continue to take the party line that we face a global warming threat, their grant applications may be in jeopardy. So there's a lot of benefit, a lot of money and political power to be gained by persuading the public that we face a threat, and you've got lots of people hankering to do exactly that.
Do you think that there are any foreign actors afoot in this? I mean, it would seem to me that foreign producers of oil could be benefited if this continues to be a tar baby for an American-based company.
I'm not sure about foreign producers of oil and coal because, if you end up with global restrictions on CO2 emissions, they may well be hit as well. However, I think a number of foreign governments, especially from the developing countries, see this as a chance to somehow start demanding reparations from the Western world for having supposedly pushed carbon dioxide levels to their current levels. And I think a number of countries, maybe Russia and China, believe that when it comes to international negotiations, they are much better at hiding their true intentions and buying into agreements that end up handicapping the U.S. and opening the door to their economic activity.
Is there does your organization feel that it has a good case, that the prospect for winning the case is good?
Yes, we do, and in fact, just this past Friday, we received a very strange letter from the Virgin Islands Attorney General, in which he lays out why he believes it's entirely appropriate for this sort of subpoena to have been issued, and why court rulings support him on this. And then he goes on to state, however, he will withdraw his D.C. subpoena to CEI. But then he goes on to say, but I reserve the right to reissue it anytime in the future. And our response 3 days later was to go into court and file for sanctions and penalties because, in our view, the subpoena from the outset was totally an abuse of process and a violation of our First Amendment rights. And the fact that he was saying he might withdraw it is just more proof of that.
Is there any legal precedent for this sort of witch hunt, I guess, for want of a better term?
Yeah, I don't think there's legal precedent for the witch hunt. I think there's historical precedent for these witch hunts. For this witch hunt and witch hunts throughout history, unfortunately. To see an entire group of state attorneys general coming together, in a concerted effort to shut down a debate on a matter of huge public importance, I think that is just unprecedented. And actually, within the last few days, the attorneys general of both Texas and Alabama have filed to intervene in the Exxon case, clearly because they see the Exxon subpoena as a travesty. It really is.
Do you know what the party makeup is of the attorneys general who are party to the suit?
I think they're mostly Democrats. Possibly all. I'm just not certain of that.
I see. Is this something that could go to the Supreme Court?
I hope it's stopped long before it gets that far. It could go, but we're hoping to basically have this subpoena quashed at the trial court here in D.C., and our hope is that'll be the end of both the D.C. subpoena and the plans of any other state AGs to do anything similar.
And could you tell me in which court is it in D.C.?
Okay, this is not in federal court. It is in the District of Columbia Superior Court.
I see. But then the lawsuit against exxon-mobile, and where is that being?
That's in state court in Texas. I'm not sure whether the Virgin Islands is going to try and remove it or not to federal court. But in a technical sense, our subpoena is not at issue in the Exxon case, at least not technically. But obviously, a ruling there in Exxon's favor, I think, will be of great benefit to us and vice versa.
Well, you've certainly given our listeners quite a bit to think about, especially on the issue of free speech, but also free enterprise. And I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, and certainly it'd be something we'll continue to follow.
Sure, and again, let me just leave your listeners with one thought. This coalition of state AGs calls itself AGs United for Clean Power. More truthfully, they are AGs United for more power. And it is not the sort of power that people in this world need more of.
Well, thanks a lot. Thank you. That's a good one. That's a pearl of the day.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Sam Kasman. He's the General Counsel for the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a public policy nonprofit organization located in Washington, D.C. Again, I'm Martin Barrios for Sparrow News. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.